Hello, today I'm going to be talking about Cuba's invaders, locals, and religion. I will first introduce its history. Cuba was claimed in 1492 by Columbus for Spain, making it a colony. It was then introduced to slavery like many other Spanish colonies, and it drastically decreased the native population, but allowed for mixing in Cuba. There was a brief conflict with Britain and Spain in 1762 and 1783. And then there's independence and U.S. involvement. In 1868 to 78, there was a 10-year war with Spain and Cuba. Cuba gained autonomy, but not much was changed. In 1896 to 98, Cuban hero José Martí waged another war against Spain. And in 1898, the United States defeated Spain, and Cuba was given to the United States, thinking it would gain independence, but it was left entangled with the Platt Amendment. In 1924, Machado became president, and in 1925, the Socialist Party formed, which was the stem for communism in 1933. Machado was defeated by Fulgencio Batista, and in 1953, Fidel Castro failed a coup in Cuba, and in 1956, Che Guevara arrived in Sierra Maestra. In 1959, a lot of things changed. The Cuban Revolution occurred, and it was led by Castro and Guevara. It soured United States relations. In 1962, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which Fidel Castro allowed the USSR missiles to protect against the United States, but it was seen as a threat, and it was resolved only when both, including the USSR, agreed to remove missiles from Turkey and Cuba. Now going to Cuba. Cuba is the largest West Indies island located along the trade routes for places like Venezuela between the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. Cuba is a communist state. Its population is 11,417,407, and the official language is Spanish. 60% of its land is for agriculture. The national dish is arroz con pollo, and it's been heavily isolated from the rest of the world. Rest of the Western world, leaving its architecture and cars from the 1950s present, which increased tourism to see this time capsule of Cuba. It is an atheist state, but many people still practice, with approximately 15% practicing syncretic religions like Santeria and 85% practicing Catholicism. But this has decreased because after communism came into power, religion was banned. Cuba is also a very diverse state. Due to slavery and immigration from Spain, the population has 64% whites, 26% mestizos, and 9% black. Cuba is very focused on education and healthcare. It is very crucial to Cuba. It has one of the highest doctor-to-patient ratios in the world. It also hinders the spread of HIV and AIDS with isolation and healthcare benefits, and it has a 99% literacy rate. Thanks to the 99% literacy program, Thanks to the 1961 literacy program before Castro, the literacy rate was 60%. It jumped 30% in 2 years, and it was accessible to everyone in Cuba, despite race or income. It has been implemented in Venezuela and Nicaragua and 30 other countries. My main topics are the U.S. invasion, race, religion, immigration, and healthcare. The first topic is U.S. intervention. The United States implemented the Platt Amendment to keep Europe out of Cuba, but Cuba did not gain independence since the United States was a protectorate of Cuba. The United States also helped to suppress black revolts in Cuba in 1912. The United States additionally helped to indirectly oust the Cuban Mussolini Gerardo Machado in 1933. It also attempted many assassinations of Fidel Castro with things like poisonous paper through a handshake. Cuba was also a communist state, and a threat. Fidel also ousted American business, which severely affected Cuba's economy and agriculture. This all led to the massive failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion and the Cuban exiles to overthrow Castro. It was orchestrated by Kennedy, and here's a snippet of Che Guevara on what he thought of the invasion.
América Latina es un símbolo para todos los pueblos oprimidos. Playa Girón es la primera derrota del imperialismo en América Latina, pero también es una de las primeras derrotas del imperialismo en escala mundial.
The next topic is race before and after revolution. Cuba is very diverse, and before the revolution was implemented, blanqueamiento, which was a way to bar Chinese immigrants and whiten Cubans, was implemented, as seen in the picture. It was generational. Fidel made eliminations of race from Cuba based on Jose Marti because it divided Cubans, but it also, this quote says, "You as a black must be grateful because the revolution has saved you. The revolution gave you rights." Even though Fidel made efforts to eliminate racism, he actually pushed it onto blacks in Cuba. They would be punished and put in jail and discriminated for being black. But the irony is that a lot of Cuban athletes are black, especially those in the Olympics. My third topic is religion. Castro said, "If people call me Christian not from the standpoint of religion, but from the standpoint of social vision, I declare that I am Christian." Fidel is actually very hypocritical of religion. He started to wage a war on religion because communists are atheists and religions divide, apparently. The religious in Cuba were called social scum because they weren't seen as the perfect communist citizens in Cuba. Also, he would rather be called Christian on a social basis than have his people actually accept religion. Religion was banned, but it's making a comeback. His brother Raul met with the Pope, a Catholic figure, in the last couple of years. And also, there's been a Catholic church built in Cuba for people in order to implement religious freedom again, which was banned a couple years ago. Despite all of this, communism is still reigning in Cuba. As you can see, the Pope is standing in front of a whole bunch of people during Mass, in front of Che Guevara and the giant Cuban flag on a building. Another religion that is becoming really popular in Cuba is Santeria. Santeria is a syncretic religion, and it has derived from the suppression of slaves and them mixing Catholicism through the suppression with their native religions in Africa. It is similar to Candomblé in Brazil and Voodoo in Haiti. The last thing is reflection. What I can tell you is that I really wanted to learn about Cuba and its history and its people and its current state because in high school I did a giant project on Cuban Revolution, and I was trying to figure out whether the revolution was more so successful because of Fidel Castro or because of Che Guevara, because Che Guevara isn't really projected as the main reason why he succeeded in mainstream media. So I wanted to explore that a little bit, and through that I learned a ton about Cuba, and it pushed me to try to make my paper and my presentation and all of my case studies on Cuba. What I learned is that there has been a lot of things going on in Cuba in terms of changes in government in the last century, through the hands of the United States and through the hands of people like Che Guevara and Fidel Castro and through the revolution. But through the revolution, which was basically a dig at capitalism and a way to eliminate capitalism and the United States from Cuba because they've been reigning over Cuba for a long time. It also implemented a lot of good programs, such as the Cuban literacy program, which was a huge success in Cuba, and it helped to bring the Cuban literacy rate up to 99%, and it was also implemented in other states and other countries, such as Venezuela and Nicaragua and 30 other countries. They also claim to eliminate racism, but racism still persists because even though the blanqueamiento system is gone, in which generation to generation the kids will get lighter, people in Cuba are still being racist and still being discriminated against. But it's a taboo topic because since it was banned, it's not really normal to talk about racism and race in Cuba at all. And if you do, you're kind of seen as a complainer. Also, the people of Cuba are very diverse, even though they've been projected as one way. And what I've learned is that despite Cuba gaining its independence, the United States will still intervene when it wants to, which was 100 years ago, or around so. And that was shown with the Platt Amendment, in which Roosevelt carried his big stick, and he basically took over Cuba, protected it from all of Europe, but in that he implemented a lot of debt in Cuba, and a lot of businesses ended up in Cuba, out of Cubans' hand, but in Americans' hands. Despite the U.S. Spanish-American War, it didn't really do much for Cuba. It really helped the United States. Also, in terms of religion for Cuba, there's Santeria, which is depicted right now, which is El Igua, which is gained throughout initiations in the religion. And religion is a touchy subject in Cuba, but it has improved over the years from being completely banned to now being slowly implemented back. As you can see, Fidel is meeting with the Pope. And then what I can see is that just Cuba is a very beautiful country, and it's kind of a time capsule, even though the first car to be shown in Cuba that was not from 1950s or 60s is the Infinity, which is shown right now, and it just shows like how appreciative the Cubans are, which I've just learned through my research, and how kind of barred off they were from the technology in the Western world. So yeah, that's what I've learned, mainly that what I've learned is that there are going to be a lot of invaders in Cuba, such as the United States. Cuba arose from it, and then Castro came into power, which is a good and bad thing, but I think that one thing that was really good out of it was that the healthcare system, and it's something that everyone else in the Western world and in other third world countries could learn from. And their literacy program is very successful, considering that it's almost basically higher than some of the Western countries. One thing that can be improved, honestly, is that the suppression, like media suppression and so forth. And also for like Cubans learning about other people, and the tourism in Cuba. I hope that improves for tourists and for people in Cuba, so they can benefit and not giant companies. Also, I hope that you guys learned something about Cuba in terms of the revolution, or just a little fact about Cuba, the political state, the healthcare, education, the racism and race in Cuba, or religion in Cuba. If it's something that you haven't learned before, I just hope that you've gained something from this presentation. So, thank you.